All right. Well, thank you, Norm, and thank you to everyone for joining us for our session on the impact of the immediate manager on workforce engagement. My name is Monica Helgoff. I'm the VP of Sales for TalentMap's Western business, and I'll be hosting today's session. Before we get started, I just wanted to cover off the agenda and a few housekeeping items. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce, first of all, our presenter, Norm Bailey-David. Norm is TalentMap's Senior Vice President of Consulting. He works with our clients to help interpret their survey data and develop high-impact action planning strategies. Today, Norm is going to be sharing his own insights on why the immediate manager has such a big impact on overall engagement. Norm is going to spend the first 5 minutes or so discussing why immediate managers are important for workforce engagement. The next 10 minutes will be spent exploring what a successful immediate manager does that's different than other managers who might be struggling. And then Norm's going to wrap up with some practical insights on how to help improve those engagement scores of immediate managers. We'll then use the remaining time to field your questions. So if you wish to submit a question, if you look to the right of your screen, you'll see a chat box. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation, but we won't be addressing them until the end of the session. Copies of the presentation deck and a link to the webinar will be available on our website within a week's time. Now, before Norm launches into his presentation, I just wanted to go over a couple of background slides on TalentMap for those who aren't familiar with our work. So we've been in business for well over 15 years. Our sole focus has been on workforce engagement and workforce measurement. So we have well over 7,000 employee engagement surveys under our belt since inception. We have surveyed well over 1 million employees, and annually we do 500 plus employee surveys. Can I have the next slide, please? So just a little bit about who we work with. TalentMap's offerings and services span from employees of about 50 all the way up to 100,000 plus. Our work is predominantly in North America, although we've done some international work as well. Our work also spans across a whole variety of industry sectors. So here you're just going to see some of the many different sectors we work in, from technology and engineering to not-for-profit to government, health services, financial sector, oil and gas, industry, and so on. So we bring a breadth of experience to the table. Norm, I guess with that slide, we'll let you take over and tell us why the role of the immediate manager is so important to workforce engagement.
Okay, thanks very much, Monica. Folks, I think the answer to that question, if you're signing on to this, is probably very obvious. But what I wanted to do is really touch on some hard data that we have done, we have used or have obtained through our numerous surveys at TalentMap that just really, really shows not only the importance of the immediate manager in terms of driving employee engagement, essentially how that shifts back and forth basically when the immediate manager is exhibiting positive behavior and versus negative behavior. What I'm going to do mostly throughout the next 30 minutes, 40 minutes or so, is really not focus on the data that says immediate managers are important. We all know that. What I really want to focus our efforts on and hopefully provide you some insight on is basically how we recognize trouble areas. What are the real differences between a well-performing supervisor or manager that is engaging their staff versus the behaviors of someone who isn't? How do we recognize that? And most importantly, what are the strategies that we see that are working in terms of dealing with that? So, I mean, let's start with something that's very, very common. Employees don't leave companies, they leave people. And in our data and everything we do, basically the reasons why people leave, there's numerous ones, 3 on top of the list in our experience, and leaving because of an immediate manager is probably the top one of that. So I think this is just reinforcing something that everybody already knows. An immediate manager or a supervisor that is exhibiting less than desirable behaviors is going to incur costs. It's going to be very, very costly for the organization because it's going to engender a lot of turnover, and I think we all know that. The thing that we might not be aware of is that when immediate management is strong, there's a real difference in terms of how important it is in terms of engagement. So when we see a chart like this, now what I'm doing is I'm showing you example data from a typical client, let's say. And in this particular case, the immediate manager score is very, very high. So 88% of this particular organization's employees are favorable towards their immediate manager. That's on the upswing, and then it's way above average. So when we see a pattern like this, we might we also see that, relatively speaking, when immediate managers are doing their job and doing it very well, we also see that their relative importance in terms of engagement actually goes down. So this is a very, very typical pattern, and many, many clients are surprised to see this because it's based on what we just saw in terms of what everybody knows, that employees don't leave companies, they leave people. The assumption is that strong immediate manager core is going to be very, very important for engagement. And that is true. However, when we do see a pattern that immediate managers are as strong as we do, they lose relative importance. So other things then take the place in terms of driving engagement. And what's the actual phenomenon here is actually a desirable one, in that a good boss is taken for granted in terms of immediate management. This is actually a desirable situation. So when we're counseling clients who have issues in terms of immediate management, where we want to coach them or counsel them is to make immediate managers less important in the overall or the grand scheme of things. And the only way we can do that is we can correct those behaviors. So, however, when we have a struggling immediate manager, when there's behaviors, and I'll talk about the specific behaviors in a moment, but when immediate managers are struggling, then we're going to start to see a phenomenon like this. And what this is showing you here is all along all of the dimensions of engagement. When we see an immediate manager, let me just put my pointer on here so you can see, we'll see that the red indicates that this department is lower than the client's overall average. The green represents a department that's above overall average. And typically what we're going to see is that the scores are accentuated, both positive and negative, according to the immediate manager. And it really is the immediate manager that drives everything. So when an immediate manager or a supervisor is working very well, we'll see something like this. So there's a halo effect that takes place. Everything else falls into line. And that makes sense because the immediate manager has so much control over their employees' day-to-day work life. However, when we see immediate managers struggling, and this is the telltale sign, and when we're doing our analysis, when we see an entire group sort of being that bold red, we can see in this case the lowest score out of all compared to the average overall is around immediate manager. So that right away we see the trouble sign. And when we're looking at an organization and we're looking department by department, this is what we should be looking for in terms of isolating the immediate manager, isolating the immediate managers that are having issues. So when that happens, well, what do you think happens now in terms of the relative importance? It accentuates. So when we have a situation like this, where we have an immediate manager or several immediate managers that are more problematic, then obviously the immediate manager takes on a whole level of greater importance in the overall scheme of things. And then moving from up here where it's positive but not important, all of a sudden now it's negative but much more important than some of the other things. Hence, we need to take some action. And taking action along immediate manager will then have impact in terms of improving engagement overall in the organization. So when we're saying immediate managers are important in terms of driving engagement, they're very important when it's negative. when it's positive, they lose relative importance. So that's a case where we basically need to essentially drive the immediate manager back into a relative state of unimportance. And that basically is looking at something like this, moving as many immediate managers as possible into the positive territory. Now, I'm talking very, very general, high-level terms. The real challenges that we're going to face are in terms of how we do that. Let me just reinforce sort of the axiom or the proverb that we saw before: employees don't leave managers, they leave people. When we see a situation, and this is from the same client data that we're talking about here, such as this, where we have a single department, and there's others here, I'm just using this to accentuate the example. When we see an example such as this, where immediate manager scores are driving the entire department score down, well, what's going to happen? And the data does confirm that people are going to leave. And you see this particular example, we ask the question typically in our engagement surveys, are people looking for or thinking of accepting a job with another employer? In this particular example, 60%, 6 out of 10 employees, when we ask the survey question, we're saying, yeah, I'm looking for another job. So that basically is an untenable situation. And this is really the burning platform that has to drive change. It has to, it is not just an engagement issue anymore, it's a key issue around turnover. And the last comment on this slide that I'll make is, yes, we anticipate at any given time a certain number of people going to, excuse me, answer yes to that question, but the average is around 1 in 4, 26%. When we see numbers of this high, we know that there's a problem. So that basically is reinforcing all of the commonly held information that we have. So the first thing we need to understand is, well, what's the difference? What are the specific behaviors that are differentiating between our best immediate managers? So when we have a situation like this, where immediate managers are very, very strong in an organization, and the worst immediate managers, where we see something like this. What's the difference? And the first thing I'll tell you is immediate managers who are struggling are not bad people. And the lore and the emotional havoc that is created by such tensions lead people to believe that it's personality traits, psychology, it's narcissism, it's all that kind of stuff. And in certain isolated cases, it may be true. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not here to psychoanalyze the poorly behaving immediate manager, but what I can do is, based on survey responses, experience, and empirical data, show you very, very clearly what are the behaviors that immediate manager doesn't do, and what are the behaviors that they do. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is something that's very, very interesting that comes from Dale Carnegie. Now, what Dale Carnegie did, a study of about 1,500 employees. Later, I'll show you a little bit of data from our own database that's a lot more robust, which is based on about 100,000 employees. But nonetheless, it really accentuates what we're talking about. So the first thing where we're going is with this is the first big differentiator between the immediate manager that's performing very well and the immediate manager that isn't. You can see all of the different behaviors here. And the level of agreement, when the level of engagement goes down, the level of agreement is going down about things that are accentuating the emotional relationship. So showing interest as a person individually, caring about one's personal life, feedback and encouragement. These are the behaviors that, when they're not exhibited, are driving engagement down. So likewise, when we see high degrees of agreement in terms of respect and things like that, trust, also important, but these tend to be more rational things. So of course, if they go awry, they're going to accentuate or compound the situation. But where I'm going with this is it really is the emotional relationship. And that this is why many immediate managers have issues, because they tend to think in very rational terms about and take a problem-solving, rational approach to their management style, where they don't believe necessarily intuitively that they need to care about the personal aspect. They basically have been programmed and been trained and been socialized in an organization where it's all about production, it's all about productivity, it's all about treating coworkers and reports as entities to get or to accomplish tasks, and when they lose sight necessarily of their individual value. And when that does happen, we start to see a beginning of the emotional relationship. So what I'd like to show you now a little bit more on the soft side. And through our engagement surveys, we compile many comments. And it's through the patterns in those comments that we can start to see patterns in terms of what's working right and what's working well. And then the next slide, or 2 slides from now, I'll show you actually, then we'll bring it down to what are the differentiating behaviors. But when you look at a series of comments, and this is a bit anecdotal, but it is coming from research or from our employee survey. So take a look at some of these things. When we're talking positively, what are the things that an immediate manager is doing well? Great guy, sure. Cares about his employees. Communicate more with the newer guys. Okay. Gives constant feedback. Cares about me. Cares about his guys. Sat down with me, actually discussed what my goals and working with me, helping me attain my goals. So you start to see it's not by coincidence that the word care is coming out repeatedly. And that really is what's driving some of this stuff. So you see that now reflected in the Imperial research, cares about personal life. So the different, what separates the great managers from the good and the not so good is really that emotional quotient. It really is that personal caring going on. When we look about the requiring improvement, what's the other side of the equation? Well, when things are not going well, what are employees saying? Well, they're talking about constructive feedback and recognition. Emphasis on the word constructive. Providing more feedback with regards to what I need to improve. Let staff know what a good job they're doing. So what we're seeing here, there's many comments in our surveys and much feedback in terms of immediate managers who are deficient. Not that they don't give feedback. It's that the feedback tends to skew on the negative side, and it's not necessarily constructive feedback. And it's also not about recognition. So the difference between a great or a good immediate manager and someone who's not so good isn't that one gives feedback and the other doesn't. It's the type of feedback. So the immediate manager who struggles, especially struggles with the emotional component, is task-oriented and thinking in terms of productivity and output. So therefore, if productivity and output from their employees is satisfactory, they don't feel they have to say, it's good, rolling fine, great. No news is good news type of attitude. And you know what? That's earlier in their career, that's probably the way that they were treated as well. The great and the good immediate managers understand and sort of intrinsically that they also have to give feedback when things are good. So when productivity and output is good, they also have to give that feedback. It needs to be balanced. And so there's the real difference in terms of sort of the separating the good from the not so good. Another one we see very often is just basically being more visible, having more presence. Some of the comments that we see, be more present at the front counter. This is a retail organization. At times my manager's hard to get in touch with. More availability would be nice. Spend more time with the team. So just be visible and out there. And this is another thing that we're seeing, unfortunately, in our technology-enabled world where we can work and do a lot of our work and communicate a lot using our computer. We tend to negate the importance of physical or in-person presence. Excuse me. And so we sit in our offices and we send out missives and commands by email, thinking that we're being more efficient and more task-oriented when we're doing that. In actual fact, over time, that's actually eroding people or employees' emotional relationship with us. So that presence or visibility is really key. And then there's the talk about career goals. Very, very important. Professional growth is another one of those dimensions that's very key, and the immediate manager plays a key role in that. So comments providing help with career goals are key. So it's not only constructive feedback, but an individual, if they don't feel that their immediate supervisor is helping them get ahead or succeed or learn in their career, then that's going to help them, or that's going to cause them to disconnect more. So let me go through. I've been talking around sort of anecdotes and some broad data. What I really want to do now is bring it home in terms of really making two lists. And they're not exhaustive, but they are the key ones in terms of separating the desirable behaviors from the undesirable behaviors. So this is really, really key before we move into the next step in terms of understanding how we're going to coach and how we're going to get our immediate managers to change those and to adopt some of these behaviors. So what are the good ones? Well, setting clear goals and expectations. It comes from this. Training and coaching staff, giving staff individual attention. Leading by example. Really, actions speak louder than words. And secondly, here, trusting staff with tasks. Very, very important that immediate managers provide what task has to be done, but then trust the staff to do it. And this can become a very big separator or differentiator between some very effective managers and some who are not effective managers. Just having that trust. And I'll talk a little bit more about trust in a few minutes. Empowers decision making. So gives as much latitude or increasing latitude to the employees to make their own decisions in terms of how they perform their jobs, but at the same time stays informed. They don't let go completely. They stay informed, but they allow folks to make the decision and then confirm or validate that decision with them, but they stay on top of it. And it's really key. Some managers will interpret empowerment as saying, well, letting people go entirely. And that just creates a sense of insecurity among some people. Some people like that, but others don't. So empowering decision making, and also that does relate with trust. Open communication, and not only what open communication means is also discouraging. I'm talking about this a little bit further down. Discourages any knowledge hoarding or information or secret. So they have to basically set the example. Recognizing talent, and then now there's a differentiation between whether or not I'm managing a very highly educated knowledge workforce, or if I'm managing a less educated, frontline, more blue-collar workforce. It's a little bit different. So the higher educated workforce, they want their talents to be recognized. They want their professional acumen to be recognized, as opposed to those who are more frontline, blue-collar. What they need more recognition around is around the values that they give to the organization. So if we're a cashier, for example, at a retail organization, what the manager needs to constantly do is not only say, good job, Joanne. They basically have to reinforce, Joanne, yes, you're just a cashier, but the cashier plays such an important role in our organization, and keep reinforcing that. That's really, really key. Constructive feedback I've already talked about. Encouraging knowledge sharing beyond the silo. A key differentiator between the immediate manager that's effective and the immediate manager that's problematic is the one that's effective encourages knowledge sharing beyond their area of responsibility. So it's very important, if I'm working in finance, that I encourage my staff, yes, go talk to the people in marketing. Yes, you can share that with marketing, not a problem. Whereas the immediate manager that's more problematic will basically say, well, I really want you to consult me before you go talk to them. And that's a real key differentiator here, because then that's what's going to create and accentuate silos. Encouraging staff to offer new ideas is really, really key. And then keeping staff informed and providing a window on the big picture. The immediate manager plays a crucial role in terms of the cascading of information and providing employees that sense of link to the big picture. So when we see two types of behavior around that. We see one type of immediate manager that will come out of a management meeting and immediately brief their staff. This is exactly what was said. This is our role. This is what it means. And the other type of immediate manager that really takes pride in the fact that they're part of this quote on the executive management or the managing team, and therefore they don't feel that they should be sharing that information outside. So that creates then distrust. So when I contrast that here with some of the undesirable behaviors, we see there's a lot of the corollaries. So some of the things that we'll recognize in terms of undesirable behavior: ambiguous, provides ambiguous or changes expectations often. Today we're doing something one way. I'm not sure if we want to keep doing it that way. Let's try something different, but I'm not sure where you want to go with that. They expect staff to learn by doing. And that's when we're talking about training and coaching. The immediate manager that's not that effective is just basically going to give very little leadership and say, yeah, you'll learn by doing the job. You're on your own here. That's the way we learned. That's the way I did it, and that's the best way to learn. So that's going to obviously have an impact of creating insecurity. Saying one thing, doing another, acting inconsistently, walking the talk or not walking the talk is so important. And when that happens, we see that bond of trust, what I'm talking about there. That's the trust that erodes. When actions are not consistent with words or pronouncements, that erodes trust. Telling staff how to do tasks and micromanaging. The difference between trusting staff with what to do and then letting them do it, basically the problematic immediate manager is going to tell staff how to do the task. And really the key here is they fundamentally believe that they're always going to be able to do a better job than their staff because they have more experience, and in some cases that may be true. But the effective immediate manager is going to let go and is going to coach and is going to train the person to do it in their image. So essentially, always believing that, yeah, I can do a better job than that, I better do it myself, and if I can't do it myself, well, I'm going to basically watch that person every day, every hour to make sure that they do it themselves. And another symptom of that type of behavior is these people tend to work long hours because micromanagement takes a lot of time. So, and they also they wear the badge of honor in terms of making, working those hours so they see themselves in a positive light, or they want their senior managers to see themselves in a positive light rather than trusting their staff, delegating to their staff, letting their staff go, following up. So you can see the differentiation of differences in behavior. Believes that no news is good news. So positive feedback is not required. If everything's going well, why should I have to talk to you? Only provides negative feedback. We talked about it, enforcing the status quo. We've always done it that way as opposed to encouraging staff to offer new ideas. Feeling privileged by being in the inner circle. That's a key one. I talked about that a little bit. Yes, I made it. I'm in the inner circle. I'm part of the management team. I might feel a privilege, but I do have a duty to keep staff informed. I'm just a conduit, and I'm only as good as my staff. That's the difference in terms of attitude. So all of those behaviors are true. All of those behaviors, when we're looking at coaching the immediate manager and helping them, it's going from what's in orange here on this slide to what's in green. And guaranteed that the problematic immediate managers are exhibiting most of these behaviors time after time after time. Every employee engagement survey that we do and the follow-up coaching that happens afterwards, it's all about changing these behaviors from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. But the single most important differentiator is what we call the caring manager. Seems to care about me as a person. That's an attitude or a statement that we include, and many other employee engagement surveys include that. And when we see that's working, so the engagement level among those people who agree or strongly agree with that statement, so my immediate manager seems to care about me as a person, when that's the case, our engagement is 90%. When it's not the case, it drops to just over half. Huge difference. Now we're talking about 101,000 employees that are stating this. So in the realm of statistics where, a sample of that size, it's very, very precise, and we're looking at significant differences of 1 and 2%. When we see the difference in engagement on this particular dimension, we know it's really about caring. It's really about that emotional quotient. So yes, all of those behaviors come as a result, but really what employees want is they want their boss to care. So how do we do it? How do we transform those struggling immediate managers into immediate managers that are going to drive engagement, and thereby they become less important in the overall scheme of engagement? We can worry about other things. Well, there's a number of common sense rules here. When we do coaching, there's a lot of things, and those of you who might have experience in coaching might recognize some of these things, but most of these things are really what I would call common sense rules. Meet with staff and identify behaviors. When we identify something like, I'll flip back to this slide here, this one in particular, when we identify through the survey data, our engagement survey data, that we have a specific immediate manager that's got issues. The first thing we need to do is really get behind that, not take that at face value. We need to understand a little bit more, actually a lot more in terms of the depth. What are the specific behaviors that staff are seeing, and then we need to basically understand and identify with that. The next thing, this is a big, big mistake that I see many organizations make, especially senior managers that don't necessarily want to take the individual approach, because when we're talking about immediate managers, even in the largest organizations, even if we have a systematic problem and we have many immediate managers, we cannot do this through group work. This is an individual assessment. Individual coaching is required. So I see too many organizations try to convene a retreat or a workshop where they get all the people in the room and then they try to start working out these issues. Not going to work. Why is it not going to work? Because the individual, the immediate manager will lose face. Same thing, we know, never in front of peers or staff. And I say this is common sense, but at the same time, I also see many organizations making mistakes with this. The next thing, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next slide, is we also have to anticipate how our immediate manager is going to react to this. We have to anticipate deflection. Deflection basically means, oh, those aren't just my employees. Those are a group that's basically grouped with other, this department and that department are all together. It's all mixed up. It's not just me. Denial, resistance. I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail when we look about in terms of how we communicate that information. We need to focus on addressing specific behaviors as opposed to personality. Even though the discussion with staff, because it is so emotionally charged, we'll talk about personality. They want to talk about psychology and personality. In actual fact, you know what? These folks are good folks. They're lovable characters, just like our boss here is in the office. He's a lovable character, but at the same time, he's so unaware of self, and I'll talk about self-awareness, that makes him lovable. Well, we need to realize that the behaviors are what has to change here, not the person. So we basically have to focus on identifying and addressing specific behaviors. Yes, consider engaging an external coach. It can be helpful. Many of you, if you're in the HR world, don't have the wherewithal to or the resources to engage in the level of coaching that may be required. So you might want to consider engaging an external coach. They're very, very helpful. Ensure accountability for the behavior changes over agreed time period. So it's not enough just to have a conversation to say, your engagement results are not really, really good. You need to do these things a little bit differently, and then consider the conversation had. There has to be an accountability mechanism. There has to be consequences for failure to change. Whether that be you need to change, or it could be drastic. In other words, we give you 3 months to exhibit these behaviors. Otherwise, you'll have to be dismissed, or there won't be a raise, or Or on the positive side, we can be looking at bonuses and promotion or other increased responsibility. So the accountability mechanism doesn't have to be negative. And we need to consult the manager and we need to consult the staff regularly. So we cannot just assume that it's a single conversation that's going to correct this. We also have to go back to the staff to see if they're observing improving behaviors, and we also have to go back to the manager. So those are some of the common sense things that I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of. This next slide really, when I present this in workshops, it's one of the favorite slides, and it really, because it encapsulates what happens when we're providing negative feedback of this sort to some of the immediate managers. We have to anticipate that this cycle will take place, and we need to time our intervention accordingly. So the first steps are going to be denial, anger. Essentially, we're going to try. We won't accept it. No, that can't be right. It's not me. It's something else. Those employees, they're so stupid. You know, what do they know? They're interested in the money. You're going to get all of this emotional response going on. So we just basically need to back off. And at some point, the manager is then going to say, "Oh my God, I'm so bad. You know, what have I done here?" There's going to be a little bit of depression. And when we hit the acceptance portion here, you know, this negotiation part is really about rationalization of what's going wrong. Oh yeah, there was a lot of restructuring that happened last year. It can't be all me, whatever. The depression happened. After a while, once the results have started to sink in, there is an acceptance that takes place. And it's at that acceptance then where the intervention needs to happen. And then it's that point where the coaching is going to, that point and only at that point where the coaching is going to have some positive effect. If we try to start coaching and getting positive behavior change at these points, it's going to bear little if no fruit. We need to let the individual go through this cycle, and then when they come to an acceptance, that's when the coaching is going to help with decision making and then taking action, but really around identifying those behaviors that are not constructive, and then coaching which behaviors are constructive. We've got the list, at least the big ones are there. When we do the detailed analysis and we talk to staff, we're going to get another series of more detailed behaviors, but that's really the basis for the coaching, all around what the person should be doing and how the person should be behaving, and not in terms of their personality or who they are as people. So I talked briefly, I mentioned about self-awareness. We know from all of our research that the biggest issue, the biggest gap that we see in terms of immediate managers exhibiting those poor behaviors is not because they're bad people, it's because they're not even aware of their impact on others. There was one organization that I dealt with fairly recently out west, and that organization had some of the issues and definitely had some issues with their immediate manager. Now, this person, essentially, she worked on the ground floor, and every morning she would come in, and this is coming from focus groups from her staff, and she would come in, she would make a beeline through cubicles, take off into her office, slam the door, or close the door. The employees were to embellish for storytelling purposes. So I'd slam the door, go in and start sending out emails in terms of tasks that she wanted to be completed, follow up, all those kind of things. So the employees would shudder, knowing that at 9:10 or 9:15 they would all start to receive these emails. Yet the person didn't make eye contact, beeline, frown on her face, going through. And this happened every day. And when we started to make her aware of this, she basically said, "Well, you know, I don't mean to do that. It's just I'm not a morning person, and I haven't had my coffee, and I got my coffee machine in the office, and I got to get in there, have my coffee, and I feel better after that." So when she realized that 30 seconds of behavior every morning, how that was being interpreted by her staff, basically, you know, after that, the difficulties in terms of accepting the results and all that kind of thing, when we narrowed it down to those brass tacks, we basically had her do an experiment. So I said, come in one day, make sure you have your coffee before you get to the office. Come in one day, and instead of beelining to your office because you got so much work to do, stop and chat with the employees on the way to through the cubicles. And she did that once, and everybody was like, what's going on here? What's with her? And she did that a couple other times during the week, and when over a period of a couple of weeks, the employees realized, oh, she's not such a bad person. And then, of course, when we did the follow-up pulse survey, her marks shot through the roof. So you can see just being aware, self-aware, can make such a difference in terms of exhibiting the behaviors. And it ripples right through, right through the system, and forcing people, not forcing people, but allowing people to come to different conclusions about this person. That's a very, very simplistic case, but it's often as simple as that, identifying very, very, key behaviors that people are misinterpreting, being self-aware, and then correcting those behaviors. Another thing that we see that is a very, very useful tool, I talked about coaching a little bit before, is 360-degree feedback programs. I don't know how many of you out there have one of these in place, but 360-degree feedback is crucial in some form or other. And the reason why it's so important is because when we're talking about self-awareness, it's different than self-perception. So people perceive themselves very differently than others perceive them, which is why we have issues of denial and defensiveness, because there's a disconnect in terms of the perception of self versus perception of others. And the a good 360 program is going to provide objective light and correct basically the gap between one's perception of self and others' perception of them on the same behaviors. So I'm not going to go into a full detailed description of a 360-degree feedback program. For those of you who may not be aware of what that is, it's simply having a manager being evaluated by people all around him, i.e. 360. So there's an evaluation completed by their superior, by several of their reports, so underneath, and then peers or colleagues or even clients, so around at the same level, around a set series of behaviors. So those 360-degree programs, I know I followed them in the past. Some of my biggest behavior changes as a leader took place as a result of those 360-degree programs. They're very effective if done well. And they can basically result and take the emotional charge out of some of those difficult conversations or coaching conversations. And if we have a widespread issue with some of our immediate management, so when it's not isolated, when we have a lot of immediate managers that are started, we see that there's an issue with engagement because of immediate management, then the 360-degree feedback program, because it can be instituted on a wide scale very quickly, can be very, very helpful. The last thing I'll talk about really in terms of dealing with this situation is simulation and peer coaching. So one of the things that we do is we help HR managers, and if you are an HR manager, we basically help simulate the conversations that are going to take place with an immediate manager, and we talk you through, or we talk people through all of the things that they can anticipate. Because the HR managers, being in the same company, being in the same environment, it is going to be emotionally difficult and very charged. So going through a fishbowl simulation, what a fishbowl is your colleagues and peers observing a simulated conversation between you and a fictitious immediate manager, and then providing input or feedback, almost acting like a conscience. That voice in your head that you wish were there when you're actually having the conversation, and telling you and coaching you in terms of how to deal with that better. So it helps with how to interpret and communicate survey results, how to interpret verbatim comments. There's a number of things that a fishbowl simulation can help you do. So on that note, we're going to open it up for questions shortly. I'll just ask Monica to come back on the line, explain where TalentMap is going to be in the next weeks and months, and then we'll look at the questions.
Thank you, Norm. Just before we get to the questions, if you've enjoyed this session, I just want to let you know about some other upcoming events where we will be speaking at. Norm, do you have that slide? Just lost it.
Sorry about that. There we go.
Okay, perfect. So we are partnering with the Conference Board of Canada. We'll be doing a live webinar online, and we'll be addressing engaging employees through career growth and development. That's happening on March 31st. Our next webinar will be coming up on April 21st, and we'll be exploring professional growth in non-profit organizations with limited opportunities. You can also see us at HRIA in Edmonton if you're out west, and we will be addressing getting employees to own engagement, and that's on April 23rd. Our next webinar in April will be about improving employee engagement when senior leadership is the problem. And then in light of our partnership with the Conference Board, we are going to be appearing in Calgary, and we're going to be presenting some research from TalentMap's own normative database, and we'll be reflecting on 10 years of engagement research and what we really know, and that's on May the 25th. Thanks so much, Norm, and I'll turn it over to you to address questions.
Okay, so we do have a number of questions here. I'm going to ask, there's someone who asks, how do you know pay isn't causing its causality? So I'm not sure causing what, so you might, the question asker might just give me a little bit more detail in terms of what you're actually asking for there. Next, in common sense rules, what is meant by ensure behaviors don't extend into abuse? Absolutely, yes. There will be cases, there are cases where behaviors cross the line in terms of employee abuse. So the behaviors that I pointed out, none of those extend into the category of abuse. So once there's an abuse case or harassment case, that opens up a whole different kettle of fish, and then obviously you're going to have a number of HR policies that are going to kick into effect in terms of dealing with abusive behavior. So, for example, I mean, which behaviors categorize as abuse? That's going to depend on your HR policies, but you know the common ones are physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, things like that. So if the behaviors are crossing that line, then we're talking about something entirely different. It often can go beyond simple the remedies that I've been talking about here in terms of coaching. The next question reads here, it seems the common sense rules can only be driven by HR or senior leadership. What can an employee do to change the behavior of their managers? I would think it's an uphill battle. Yes, it is an uphill battle, and oftentimes HR needs to play a mediator role in this, only because the atmosphere is so charged. So yes, on occasion you do have employees that have enough assertiveness to be able to address some of these directly, but given the nature of a hierarchical relationship and the power situation that a boss has over their employees, i.e. the power to fire or the power to inflict to inflict different consequences, negative consequences, HR or some sort of EAP, employee assistance program, should often be called into question, only to mediate that. So when we see, I do believe that when we see systematic patterns of misbehavior, and those come out and we identify them or diagnose them through a tool such as an employee engagement survey or focus groups, then it is incumbent amongst on the HR to play a role in terms of addressing that, shouldn't necessarily be left with that responsibility. So the next question is how how really low scores on pay as well as scores on lean management both were low. On the slide that I did show, that's coincidental. The two are not necessarily related, so I'm sorry that you made that interpretation. I was just taking the slide to show that the difference between the importance of immediate manager. It had no relationship with regards to pay whatsoever. Your example of lack of self-awareness of that manager made me think of what tools could or she have used to learn by herself that she was having such a negative impact on her staff. Well, that's the thing about self-perception, self-awareness. It's unless someone points it out or you see a video of yourself, it's going to go for a long time without being perceived. Not many people I know walk around holding a mirror or videoing themselves. And self-perception really, self-awareness really needs to be brought out by someone on the external side. Very rarely it happens, but it's not common that someone's going to have an epiphany and think, oh my God, I've been behaving this way, I should change that behavior. It very seldom comes from within. It needs to be pointed out from outside, and then, in the psychological world, I'm sure we've seen from reading those magazines and all the notion of the intervention. Well, the intervention essentially is the external peer group bringing to light the behaviors or the self-destructive behaviors of the individual. So very, very rarely will someone have that epiphany on his or her own. So that's all the questions that I see in front of me at this point. On that note, I'm going to leave you now. I'm going to thank you very, very much for taking part in this session. And keep in mind where we're going to be in the weeks and the months to follow. Keep in mind that also that we do these webinars every month. So always the last Thursday of the month. So make a mental note of that, and you make sure you're on our subscription list. If you're not, just go on our website. It's very easy to figure out how to get on there. So on that note, thank you very, very much. Hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. We as HR professionals tend to think of millennials as people savvy, tech savvy, loyal, not so much, fun-loving, yes, and hard-working, maybe not so much. When we contrast that to the way millennials describe themselves,